So
We are on YouTube.
So you can go ahead and share your screen.
Okay. So I can...
I'll send this out. Okay, I've sent the link out to your guests. So yeah, we'll say welcome to Nicola's to guests as well. Thank you for joining us today.
Okay, Nicola, you have 20 minutes for the presentation. Please go ahead.
All right. Are you timing me or should I time myself?
I am timing you.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah,
Thank
and if you need, so I can give you, I don't know, maybe the last 5 minutes I can.
Sure. I think I should be good. It's been
Okay.
around 19-20 minutes throughout.
Okay.
Perfect.
Cool.
Okay. Alrighty. So thank you, everyone. I want to thank you for taking the time to attend my thesis defense titled Detecting Patient Position Using Bed Reaction Forces for Pressure Injury Management. Pressure injuries are defined as localized damage to the skin and underlying soft tissue, usually over a bony prominence or related to a medical or other device. Despite many pressure injuries being preventable, a 2004 Canadian study showed that 1 in 4 patients will suffer from pressure injuries. Pressure injuries are also very slow healing, which makes them very burdensome for the patients and expensive to treat. Currently, the best practice for preventing and treating pressure injuries is to reposition patients every 2 to 4 hours. However, repositioning rates in clinical settings have been shown to be low, ranging from 38 to 66%. Before I dive into my thesis, I want to remind ourselves of the overarching goal of the project. We want to develop a prompting repositioning system that uses only load cell data and only needs IMUs for initial calibration to increase adherence to repositioning and accelerate the healing process of pressure injuries. The system will trigger an alert via cell phone or digital clock, as seen in the image, when a patient has been in the same position for too long and provide a prompt for repositioning. This project is important because it directly addresses the slow healing of pressure injuries and the low adherence to repositioning rates. If we factor in our aging population, there is potential for a healthcare system to become even more overburdened by patients suffering from pressure injuries. Furthermore, approximately 75% of pressure injuries occur around the pelvic girdle. This suggests that we need to identify a better way of understanding how high-risk areas, like the greater trochanter and the sacrum, are being loaded, in order to determine the optimal positions for offloading and how to minimize the risk of pressure injuries. By designing an inexpensive, contact-free prompting repositioning system, we want to take a proactive approach to pressure injuries, helping caregivers and healthcare professionals better track repositioning at home to ensure adequate offloading. Using this data, healthcare professionals would be able to provide more personalized repositioning plans, identifying which positions the patients should spend more time in based on their anatomy and based on the expected forces their tissues would experience. So to better understand my thesis, I want to briefly explore our team's previous research findings and how that informed my approach. Our team previously developed a machine learning system that was able to predict the patient's position in bed using bed reaction forces and measured by a set of 4 load cells. Our pilot data with healthy participants in Care Lab showed that using 12 engineered features and a feed-forward neural network with 30% incremental learning, we could detect patient position as left, right, or supine with 94.2% accuracy. However, when we tested this in a real home care setting, the accuracy dropped to approximately 70%. We suspect that this drop in accuracy is related to the wide range of side-lying positions that are commonly adopted in the real world. In Wong et al.'s testing, participants were carefully positioned to maintain a specific plus minus 90 and 30-degree position for the duration of each hold to get accurate ground truth labeling. This likely restricted the generalizability of the model, and it didn't take into account that people often slip out of the position they're placed into, meaning the start angle may not be equal to the end angle. In contrast, the home data that we collected allowed us to get data from a more realistic representation of positions. However, we ran into a new problem of reliably labeling the data for ground truth using video. So to address these issues, we propose using a more continuous measure for patient angles in order to capture the ground truth data in a more reliable way. And this brings us to the goal of my project, which is to develop a machine learning model to predict an individual's position in bed with finer precision than left, right, and supine. We will use inertial measurement units to provide ground truth labels to account for the wide range of sleeping positions. Look at this slide. I'm proposing to change the old system from one that uses video data for ground truth during training to one that uses IMU data for ground truth during training. In both cases, when deployed, the system would primarily function without a camera or IMUs, apart from a short IMU data collection for personalization purposes that will be discussed later. There are two important definitions when looking at my project goal, which are the transverse pelvic angle and the bin sizes. If we take a look at the figure on the right, the transverse pelvic angle is represented by theta, and it is defined as the angle between the 0-degree reference line and the line perpendicular to the pelvis in the anterior-posterior direction. The bin sizes are different ranges of angles that a participant's position can fall in between, and they will determine how precisely we will predict the position, where a narrower bin means a more precise prediction. The original bin sizes used in Wong et al. Study were divided into left, right, and supine. There were no positions greater than 90 degrees included, and the bins were not defined by specific angles, but instead we had multiple raters classify these positions and we compared their labels. For my project, I decided to choose 4 different bin size possibilities of 70 degrees, 45 degrees, 30 degrees, and 15 degrees, so I could compare the performances of the different sized bins. So next, having covered the project background, we'll move on to the research questions and hypotheses. So the first research question revolves around if the use of an IMU mounted to the pelvis for ground truth labels will improve the detection accuracy of an individual's position of left, right, and supine compared to our previous work. And here I expect that the detection accuracy will improve. Secondly, considering that the prevalence of pressure injuries around the pelvic girdle is around 75%, I wanted to look at what range of transverse pelvic angles fully offload the greater trochanters and the sacrum. Here I expect that the right greater trochanter will be offloaded for all transverse pelvic angles that are less than or equal to 0 degrees, and the left greater trochanter will be offloaded for all transverse pelvic angles that are greater than or equal to 0 degrees. And for the sacrum, I expect it to be fully offloaded for positions that are greater than or equal to 90 degrees or less than or equal to negative 90 degrees. Thirdly, I want to look at how the prediction accuracy will change as the system is trained to predict the transverse pelvic angle with increasing precision, so as the bin sizes are made smaller. And here I expect the prediction accuracy will decrease as precision is increased. And lastly, I wanted to look at the feasibility of using an IMU mounted to the pelvis to provide ground truth labels for an 8-hour data collection session with patients at risk of pressure injuries in their home environments. And I also expect this to be feasible. Moving on to the methods. So each of the 20 participants had 2 IMUs to record the ground truth angle for the pelvis and the sternum. However, only the pelvic ground truth was used as most pressure injuries occur around the pelvic girdle. I also attached 3 force-sensitive resistors, or FSRs, to each participant, one on each of the greater trochanters and one on the sacrum, to measure the force experienced at each of these points in each position. The FSR size is approximately 4 centimeters by 4 centimeters. Data collection had 2 phases, the primary phase and the secondary phase. In the primary phase, participants were asked to adopt 11 different poses as seen in the photo on the right. The positions included 0 degrees, plus minus 15, 30, 45, 60, and 90 degrees, and each position was held for 3 minutes. The secondary phase consisted of 10 different positions that were selected at random by participants, one of which the participants were asked to adopt a prone position. These positions were used to better reflect the wide variety of real-life sleeping positions. Now here's an example of the IMU measurements. The graph shows the transverse pelvic angle versus the participant position. The IMU recorded measurements in the Euler roll, pitch, and yaw axes. However, I only needed the roll values in my analysis. Each plateau here represents one positional hold, and the points in between are generated by participants changing positions. This data was ultimately used to provide the ground truth bin codes for each data point. During my analysis, I also found that our system recorded the weights of 2 participants incorrectly, deviating approximately 15 kilograms from their self-reported weight. I suspect that the reason for this incorrect measurement was due to a problem with the data collection system itself. And looking at the graph of the mean center of mass in the y-axis versus the mean center of mass in the x-axis, it reaffirmed that there was a problem with our system, as we see 2 outliers in large purple circles and large blue squares. As I previously had concerns with not having enough data to train my models, and now having removed 2 participants, I decided to expand the training data set by incorporating old data from Wong et al. Study from our home data, while keeping the test data limited to the new participants with associated IMU ground truths. By adding previous data that may be less accurate, the models are likely to underestimate the full potential benefits of having IMU ground truth compared to having a full data set with IMU ground truths. And to see how the data was used, we'll look at an example of the two-part hierarchical classification approach for the 30-degree bin size. So level 1 of the hierarchical classification will be trained on all three datasets and tested on one model using only new lab data. As mentioned before, because we're using old data that does not have associated IMU ground truth labels, we can only classify a position as supine, right, or left. Level 2 classification uses only the new data, and it's split into 3 tests, one for each of the original classifications from level 1. As mentioned before, with our 3 datasets, each dataset is tested using a separate model in order to predict more specific bins. Looking at the overall hierarchical classification, if a data point being predicted was at 45 degrees, the first level would predict right, and the second level would predict a bin containing 45 degrees, which in this case is the 40-degree to 70-degree bin. The reason for taking this approach is that it reduces the number of positions the model needs to choose between when picking a specific bin. In the 30-degree bin case, if we were to try and immediately predict a specific bin, we would be choosing between 12 different options. By first choosing between supine right and left, the model now only needs to choose between 5 right bins to classify the 45-degree position. I used the combination of machine learning and deep learning models for the hierarchical classification. For level 1, I used both machine learning and deep learning models, but for level 2, I opted to use only machine learning models as my data size was too small for the deep learning models. To validate and evaluate our models, we decided to use a leave one participant out cross-validation to maximize our number of training observations. This means that we used all the data except for the held out participant for training purposes, and then tested the model on that participant that was held out. We also decided to take an incremental learning approach to simulate the benefits of personalizing the model for each participant. Incremental learning works by incorporating a percentage of the test participant's data into the training data to personalize the model for that participant. Looking at the figure on the right, we can see that a slightly larger portion of the testing data is incorporated into the training data as our C-value increases. If the system were being used with real patients, the black portion would represent the personalization or incremental learning data we need to initially collect with each participant or each patient to refine the base model and customize it for them. Now we can get into the results in the discussion. So this table here describes the mean accuracies of the level 1 predictions. The first column contains the models I ran, and the other columns represent various test cases where I incorporated a different amount of incremental learning data from 0% to 30%. The best performing model here was the XG Boost model with a mean accuracy of 84.2% at 30% incremental learning. When I compared all the 30% incremental learning models, the omnibus test reported a significant difference between the mean accuracies of the model. However, post hoc bone-for-only comparisons of the top 3 models found no statistically significant differences. Therefore, the top models perform comparably and should all be examined before deciding which model is best to use. I also compared the incremental learning levels for the top 3 models to their adjacent values, comparing 0 to 10%, 10 to 20%, and 20 to 30%. The omnibus test here showed that there was no significant differences. Now, despite there being no significant differences for adjacent values, it's important to consider that our test set for each participant was very small, averaging 151 observations. This means that for 30% incremental learning, we were adding on average 45 observations to a pool of over 20,000. I believe that if we were able to collect more data, that the incremental learning would have had a larger impact here. In terms of offloading, we'll first look at the right trochanter. So this is a graph of the percentage of maximal load versus the position for the right trochanter. Maximal load for the right trochanter occurs at 90 degrees, and all the other loads are a percentage of that maximal load. As expected, the right trochanter was loaded for all right lying positions and offloaded for all left lying positions in supine. Furthermore, as the participant angle approached 0 degrees, the force experienced by the right trochanter decreased. An omnibus test showed that there were significant differences between the force experienced by the right trochanter at adjacent positions, and post hoc bone-for-only comparisons highlight which adjacent values were significant using brackets in the diagram. The left trochanter has a similar graph and the left trochanter was loaded for all left lying positions and offloaded for all right lying positions in supine. And it also had the same trend of decreasing force at the left trochanter as the participant angle approached 0 degrees. An omnibus test once again indicated significant differences between the force experienced between the left trochanter at adjacent positions, and post hoc bone Ferroni comparisons showed similar findings to the right trochanter, except that 2 of the comparisons present for the right trochanter were only approaching significance for the left, which is why there are only 2 brackets here opposed to 4 in the right for the right trochanter. And lastly, the sacrum has a similar graph. However, here, as the participant angle approaches 0, the force experienced by the sacrum increases. An omnibus test indicated that there were significant differences between the force on the sacrum experienced at adjacent positions, and post hoc bone Ferroni comparisons are highlighted with the square brackets in the diagram. We see that the sacrum was not fully offloaded in any position that required the use of pillows, as the participant's sacrum was likely pressed up against the pillow to hold that position. It is possible for a well-trained clinician to avoid placing a pillow at the sacrum, but we don't know how often this is followed in a clinical setting. Based on my data, if complete offloading is required for tissue healing, patients may need to assume positions where they do not require pillows for repositioning, or have the pillows placed in a way that can support their position without applying pressure to the sacrum. And from these results, we've identified the regions where offloading occurs, highlighted in green, for each of the 3 at-risk areas. The results also indicated that the smallest bin size needed to detect meaningful changes in offloading was 15 degrees. However, if tissues need to be fully offloaded, then classifying positions as left, right, or supine will be sufficient. But if we want to be more precise, this may be useful for detecting self-repositioning that may occur during sleep, and this can better inform caregivers if patients need to offload sooner or later, depending on the small movements made. Now, moving on to level 2 accuracies. The best performing model for level 2 accuracy varied depending on bin size, but the LGB model was best in 5 out of 8 cases. As an example, we will look more in depth into the right and left 30-degree bins. So here's a table for the right 30-degree bins that shows the expected bin values horizontally and the observed bin values vertically. For the right bins, the best model is the GBC model with an accuracy of 75.61%. And looking at the counts, when a model makes a mistake, it is only often off by 1 bin, which is encouraging. Looking at the first 3 bins, the model predicts at 77%, 95%, and 83%, which is promising as we expect our target population to be primarily assuming positions within this range. For the left bins, we have a similar table as the right, and here the XGB model is the best with an accuracy of 79.07%. Similarly to right classification, the counts show that when the model predicts incorrectly, it is normally off by 1 bin. And looking at the first 3 bins once again, the model predicts with an accuracy of 74%, 84%, and 89%. Comparing the level 2 accuracies for different bin sizes, we see a trend of decreasing accuracy as precision increases. An omnibus test indicated significant differences in the mean accuracy for different bin sizes in both level 2 right and left classification. However, a post hoc test between adjacent bin sizes showed only a significant difference for the 3-bin to 5-bin comparison of the left classification. These results suggest that the bin size should be optimized based on our goal to account for the trade-off between accuracy and precision. And lastly, to determine the feasibility of using IMUs with patients at risk of pressure injuries, we need to look at the hardware and patient safety considerations. From the hardware perspective, the Schirmer IMUs have the required specifications to store 8 hours of data internally for an overnight study, and they also have the battery life to do so. From the patient safety perspective, we would need to find a way to place the IMU on the patient in a way that it's not only stable, but that avoids damaging the patient's skin. So an example of a way may be to work with wrapping the IMU within soft layers or foam or another material so that it does not irritate the skin. Now moving on to the conclusions. So overall, the main findings of the study were that an IMU mounted to the pelvis improved level 1 classification from approximately 70% to 84.2%. Complete offloading occurred from 0 to 90 degrees for the left trochanter, 0 to negative 90 degrees for the right trochanter, and at negative 90 and 90 degrees for the sacrum. Prediction accuracy decreased as the precision increased, and it may be feasible to use an IMU mounted to the pelvis for an overnight data collection with participants at risk of pressure injuries in the home environment. Now, limitations in future work. So the limitations of the study included that load cell data was filtered using customized parameters for participants, meaning it could have increased the prediction accuracy. Most of the training data did not contain IMU ground truth, meaning it could have diminished the full benefits of IMU ground truth by negatively impacting accuracy. The patient population used does not reflect our target population. Certain primary positions were unnatural and may have required conscious effort to maintain them, thus preventing participants from fully relaxing and changing their breathing. Pillows were placed under the sacrum for side-lying positions, resulting in pressure on the sacrum that could have been avoided with alternate placement. And the bed softness and bed covers were not examined in this study. Now, future work will need to repeat this study with participants at risk of pressure injuries in their home environment for an overnight data collection. We'll need to validate how an IMU can be safely used for participants at risk overnight, or to see if we can do some sort of in-lab shorter study to ensure that we can monitor patient safety. We'll need to repeat the offloading study while avoiding placement of pillows at the sacrum, investigate the limitations of competing technologies that use an IMU to predict body position, and treat identification of patient position as a regression task instead of a classification task to see how much more accurately we can predict patient position. Thank you. That's my presentation, and I'm open to answering any questions.
So I'm going to stop this stream. Thanks to all the guests that have joined us today. It's great to see so much support for Nicola's work. Nicola, I don't know if you can see this, but there are about 23 or 24 people watching for most of that. So